Hi, I'm Lara and this is Trip Train Trilogy, and today I'll be discussing the Avenger who I do not think should have been snapped in Infinity War and should have been present for the entirety of Endgame. Also, I'll be discussing when not to kill off characters due to at least my personal rule of drama. So first, I would like to name the character who was dusted at the end of Infinity War, who I do not think should have been, and that is Peter Quill. So first, I would like to name the three rules I have, and then I would like to go specifically why they apply to Peter Quill. So the first rule is you should only kill off characters if it's the more tragic and emotional option. So if killing off a character is a less tragic and emotional than keeping them alive, that kind of defeats the purpose of killing them. Now, if it's like a peaceful old person death and moving on, that'd be one thing. Well, if the purpose is to make the reader emotional, but it's less emotional, or it prevents potential emotional things that could happen, then you should probably not kill them. Now, of course, there's exceptions. Sometimes you have to kill a character even if they have tons of potential in the story, if you have a lot of characters. But personally, I think Peter Quill had way more potential alive than he did dead, to the extent that this rule applies to him. Rule number 2, if you kill large groups of characters at once or kill characters every single chapter, readers can't empathize with that many characters at once, and they tend to pick specific ones to feel emotional about. And then rule number 3, which is not necessarily specific to killing your character, but that rule is that your characters, especially if they are a protagonist, should always face repercussions for their mistakes and bad choices. So let's get into why these 3 rules apply to Peter Quill specifically, as opposed to the many other Avengers. So at the end of Infinity War, when Thanos snapped them, the character that we were meant to be most emotional about being killed off was Peter Parker. I know they're both Peters. I'm sorry about that. But Peter Parker, I'll just refer to him as Spider-Man to avoid confusion. So Spider-Man was just a kid. He was a teenager, and he was almost a surrogate son for Tony Stark. So the fact that he died tragically scared in Tony's arms was really emotional and sad, whereas every other character was an adult, except Black Panther's sister, but he didn't tragically die in her arms. She kind of just disappeared, so it wasn't as emotional. So the fact that Spider-Man was the only kid who died, and he had the most emotional death, and he died at the end, it's pretty clear that his death was meant to be the most emotional, and it was effectively the most emotional. And so this seems pretty fair, but then you might be wondering, but why would you kill Nick Fury and Bucky then if their deaths weren't as emotional? And the thing is they had to kill off so many. But the reason why Peter Quill, I do not think, should have been dusted is because it was his fault that they failed. And the reason it was Peter Quill's fault is because Thanos killed his love interest Gamora, who is also Thanos' kidnapped adoptive daughter. It's a complicated family. But the point is, it was Peter's fault because the plan had gone perfectly, and he did think of the plan to get Thanos' gauntlet off, and they were pulling it off, and then he discovered Thanos killed Gamora, and he freaked out, punched Thanos, and Thanos was able to get out of the mind control thing and escape, and ended up wiping out the half of all life everywhere. Personally, I think it would have been more interesting to see Peter deal with the loss of Gamora than it would have been to see him disappear with everyone else, but he did end up disappearing. Now, again, everyone lost someone, so we could have explored everyone's loss, but specifically since Gamora's death was more permanent, since she didn't dust away like everyone else, but because she was murdered off the cliff to get the Soul Stone, and also because it was Peter's fault that Thanos succeeded at wiping off half of all life, is why he specifically should have been the one to remain. And I personally think they missed a great opportunity to explore and develop his character in really in-depth, meaningful ways. Because of course all the characters felt like they failed, but he was the one who directly screwed up. So I felt this way the moment I finished Infinity War, but I didn't say anything right away, and then it was a bit later, and I was like, you know what, maybe Endgame will do something, and I'll be like, yeah, they couldn't have fit him in. But after seeing Endgame, I think I could see a place they could fit it in. So we're going to get into Endgame spoilers, but I will say before that I do really like Endgame, and this is by no means me being like, oh, it's a terrible movie because it didn't have Peter Quill throughout most of it. No, that's not an issue. It was a great movie, and though of course every movie is flawed, and I have more than just this issue with it, overall I really enjoyed it. This is just one thing I thought I would discuss, to kind of give advice on when not to kill off characters, and also to discuss how I think he could have been included more in Endgame. So let's get into the spoilers for Endgame. So of course it would have been nice to see how Scarlet Witch losing vision would have affected her, especially since they don't really ever show how her brother's death affects her, so they really need to show that stuff more. But besides that, the reason why Peter is specifically relevant when it comes to the lost category is that they sort of do bring Gamora back. Now, of course, it's not actually Gamora, it's a different person, but still, and I really do sincerely hope they don't forget about the Gamora who tragically died at her father's hand, because that would be an injustice to what happened to her. However, she is somewhat back with a different dimension version of her, so at the end of the day, even though I do hope they explore what that means and go into depth in it, there is still going to be that little hope for Peter that Gamora is there, even if it's not his Gamora. And it would have been nice to have seen him have to deal with the loss of her in a scenario when she was completely gone and there was absolutely no hope. Especially because unlike the characters who were snapped, Gamora's death was more permanent, so it would have felt more visceral to the viewer, because while the viewers kind of the whole time was like, yeah, everyone who got snapped is going to come back. However, people weren't necessarily expecting that way to bring her back, so people would have been able to feel his loss more because less people would have expected her to come back, so his loss would have felt more real than other characters who missed people who were snapped when we all knew they would come back. I mean, Spider-Man's death was sad, but we all knew he was coming back. There's a sequel movie coming out. But Gamora wasn't as sure, so it was a missed opportunity because it was one thing the viewers didn't necessarily all predict. Now, it wasn't completely shocking to me, but still. So those are my main reasons why I don't think Peter should have been snapped. However, instead of just ending there, I'm going to explain how I think he could have been incorporated into Endgame. So first of all, he would have been in the ship with... So I'm going to try to add in Star-Lord with changing as minimal things as possible and adding as little scenes as possible. So preferably just swapping out a couple things or adding him into an already there scene. So originally I would say it starts out pretty much the same with him trapped with Nebula and Tony Stark. Maybe he's able to help with the ship a bit more, but it's about the same. And I think you could still easily have Tony be kind of isolated in the ship by having him sort of shun Star-Lord for being the cause of Spider-Man, his surrogate son's death. So then once they get to Earth, Tony tells them what happens, and they're all kind of mad at Star-Lord. So then when all of the Avengers go off into space to track down Thanos, I think it would be good to leave Star-Lord behind and have him not be allowed to come, and to show how that upsets him and how he feels upset, but also feels like a failure and kind of knows he deserves to be left out. So after they find Thanos has destroyed the Infinity Stones and then they kill him, they go back to Earth, and they can't fix everything. The people are still dead. So during the 5-year time gap when everyone does different things, it could have been pretty easy to find a place to stick him. They could have easily just sent him off with Rocket and Nebula, which would have been not added really anything or taken away. However, I think that they could have had him stay on Earth. The way I interpret it is the Avengers who don't really know him as well would be a bit more resentful, whereas Rocket maybe would invite him to come with Nebula and himself, but I think it would be more impactful if Peter denies coming with them and maybe chooses to go to Missouri to see if any of his blood relatives are still alive, or if he ended up killing the last of them. And I think this sort of wandering across the country in isolation as a sort of hitchhiker would really have shown a sense of self-loathing, and it could have been a purposeful isolation to kind of punish himself and wallow in his grief and guilt. I think it would have been effective to have him go to Missouri and fail to find anyone he was once related to kind of also conclude the fact that some people are like, does he have family there? is he ever gonna check and do it in a really tragic and emotional way? So then when Ant-Man comes back and comes with the plan, when Rocket ends up flying back to join in on the plan, I think he could just be the one to go pick up Peter and he could join in just as the scene was originally. So things go exactly as they had before. However, this time, one thing about the time things is that they all have suits, but there's also a machine that controls it. However, no one's left to man the machine, which seems kind of weird. It's like, what's the point of it? So in this version, they have the same amount of serums, but I would say someone has to stay behind to man the machine. And though the Avengers don't entirely trust Peter, since he knows what the Power Stone is, they're gonna let him come along with them and specifically want him to get that stone that he found in the original Guardians of the Galaxy. So in this version, I would say the Hulk should be the one to stay behind. And then Rhodey, who is Warhammer, would be the one who's supposed to get the time stone. So by requiring someone to use the machine and by also having it so there isn't enough Pym particles for all of them, I think it makes it feel a bit more realistic and a little less convenient, but that's not really the point. It's just because. Now, to keep the film as similar as possible, and because I actually like the scene that they had, I would add in a sort of glitch where maybe Thor is drunk and he bumps into Star-Lord or Rhodey and they bump it, and then one of them bumps into the other one. So then Star-Lord and Rhodey end up sort of tangled up when they're going through the time loop and they end up switching places. Which, might I add, still makes a lot more sense than Captain America showing up with some random Captain America shield from who knows where after going back into the past, considering that the time travel logic of this movie said that affecting time would cause a separate dimension. So really, Captain America should have been in a different dimension. So old man Cap shouldn't have been there in the end. Inaccurate. So me saying the time twisting still makes more sense than that, because they never said that bumping into people or maybe messing up the device or anything of the sort couldn't cause people to end up with different coordinates. Heck, they could have even just accidentally switched suits or something because someone knocked it over and didn't realize it. Anything. It still makes more sense than the Cap thing, so I don't think my idea is too outlandish. So then Rhodey, Nebula, Natasha, and Clint, they all end up in space together. And at first they're going to be like, oh no, it's Rhodey, we were supposed to use Star-Lord. But they calm down, figure out, and they're just like, we'll wait for him on the planet and we'll figure it out where it is. And the scene goes about the same, but with a bit more tension at the beginning. But then on Peter's end, he ends up where Rhodey was supposed to be, in the place of getting the time stone, which is what the Hulk originally did in the movie. So because of Peter's past mistake, at first the Avengers are very upset and they don't necessarily trust him to go get it. However, one thing in this movie that while some of the other scenes, such as Rhodey and Nebula, they could have easily had different Avengers get the Power Stone. But the stones that Captain America got, Tony Stark got, and Ant-Man got were really well required them to be themselves, either whether it was from being recognizable or using their tech. So they end up letting Star-Lord go get the time stone. And the way I see this would be is probably Ant-Man would actually be the first one to defend him, which gives Ant-Man a bit more depth. But also, since Ant-Man has consistently been a criminal and needed second chances, I could see him being the one to be like, hey, we should give him a second chance. I know I've needed them and this is what it's led to. And then I would see Cap as being like, okay, I agree with you. And then Tony Stark being kind of peeved because it's his fault Peter Parker Spider-Man is dead, but eventually begrudgingly letting it happen and going off with the others. So they end up having the same scene, but then Peter Quill ends up going for the time stone. So the reason I decided to switch Peter Quill with Bruce Banner is because in this movie, so in the past couple movies, they've been building up where the Hulk's uncontrollable, and at first he needed Natasha to help, but then he ended up separated in space and he was stuck as the Hulk, then he ended up stuck as Bruce, and now in this one he's found some sort of in-between where he can be in the Hulk's body with Bruce's intelligence, which is cool, but also I will admit that kind of skips his entire conflict resolution. Like, this character has been building up his conflict between himself and the Hulk within him, and they kind of just brush away the solution in a time jump, and they're like, yeah, he's good now. So that's not necessarily the best writing, but since he's already fixed, and I'm not going to try to rewrite that much of the story, I'm just trying to talk about Peter Quill. Since Bruce Banner is already pretty good and he's accepted himself and pretty much become the peak of who he is, there's not really that much of a reason to have him meet the Ancient One, who is sort of a wise mentor character. Whereas Peter Quill is pretty messed up. So I would have Peter meet the Ancient One, and just like what happened with Bruce Banner, she knocks his soul out of his body and he's talking to her, trying to convince her to give it to him. However, in this one, I think there could be a good chance for analysis of him. So she could talk about how he could say it's his fault and how he needs to fix things, and he promises he won't screw up again and help her. And I think this is important. One thing I think is important to note that I'm not sure if the Ancient One should necessarily mention too specifically, but she could kind of allude to, is that in the first two Guardians of the Galaxy movies, Peter Quill is able to save the day through his love of others, whether it's the loving memory of his mother or his love for Yondu as a sort of adoptive father. Now, again, in the second Guardians of the Galaxy, there is rage against his father for killing his mother, but the real way that he wins is through his love of Yondu and realizing that he's important to him. Whereas in Infinity War, it was rage that caused him to fail. It wasn't necessarily that he was remembering and loving Gamora as much as he was raging at what Thanos did to her. I think the Ancient One could kind of bring it up to him and reminding him that it was love, not revenge, that made him a hero. I also think she should still be like, hey, you need to solve this problem yourself. I can't do my universe. But then he continues talking, and he mentions how the wizard gave the stone away to Thanos perfectly fine. He doesn't see why she can't bring him to him. And then she has the same realization she did with Bruce Banner and ends up giving it to him. So she could point out to him that, hey, even though what you did may have seemed like a mistake, it actually might have been the only way to save the universe. However, he should not depend on his mistakes to save them in the future. This sort of brings a sort of peace to Peter where he's like, maybe I haven't ruined it permanently, even though I ruined it for a time. Maybe I can redeem myself and I don't have to constantly be in guilt and isolation. So after this, the rest of the movie plays out the same, but with little tidbits of Peter Quill forgiving himself and realizing the guilt and rage will only hold him back. So everything plays out about the same. However, this time in the final battle, I do want Peter to do a bit more, considering Thanos did kill his girlfriend. But however, I don't want Peter to be the one to just beat up Thanos and win. Because first of all, this movie's more about the 6 Avengers, even if the Hulk kind of got a bit brushed over like they do in almost every movie, and I took one of his scenes. But you know, it's fine. It's fine. So I think it would be good that in the final scene when Tony finally confronts Thanos at the end, in this version of the scene, a lot more of Thanos' underlings are around them and ready to fight and prevent them from getting to Thanos. A bit before that, Peter Quill is close enough to Thanos that he has the opportunity to attack him. But Tony Stark is also going towards him. And Peter Quill realizes that he isn't the stronger one and that he needs to step back, put his rage aside, and do what's right and be humble. So instead of Peter going up and punching Thanos in the face, but instead Peter yells, "I got your back," and turns and starts shooting them, giving Tony an opening to attack Thanos without being attacked from behind by others. This would be a quick 1-2 second thing that could be easily slipped in that still allows Tony to have the spotlight of saving the day, but this also completes Peter's lesson throughout the movie without taking away from any of the other characters, specifically Tony, the one who makes the heroic sacrifice. And Tony would defeat Thanos just like the original movie, and then it would end pretty much about the same. Now, this solution might not be perfect, but I feel that it does Peter Quill's character more justice, and it also makes him face the repercussions of his mistake instead of just letting him go away until the problem is already solved, so he never really has to face them. Because the truth is that by snapping him away, he doesn't come back until what his mistake caused is already over, so he doesn't really have a chance to fully feel the guilt of what he did. But this also allows for character growth and for him to move on before the replacement Gamora comes back. And hopefully, if this version was edited well, it wouldn't really add much screen time to the movie. It would just swap out some pre-existing scenes and edit a little bit of moments into others. Now, of course, I do take issues with other things in this movie, and I do take issue in some way with my solution, how it takes away from the Hulk, since he is one of the original 6 heroes, and this is kind of their send-off. However, the Hulk still can proceed in later movies. And also, to be honest, I don't really think the Hulk talking to the Ancient One really did much for his character, and I feel like one of my issues with this movie is I feel like the Hulk's character was kind of brushed aside First of all, his character arc was solved off screen during the time jump. And second of all, I know a lot of people don't like the relationship between Bruce Banner and Natasha Romanoff, and I'm not saying I want them to be a couple or anything, but they set it up. In Age of Ultron, they sort of set up and hinted at a romance, but that's not really the biggest thing. The biggest thing is that she could calm him, and then later on, I'm pretty sure in Civil War she mentions him, and I do know for a fact that in Thor Ragnarok, her video clip playing is what caused him to turn back into Bruce Banner. It was Black Widow that saved him from being trapped as the Hulk forever. So the fact that they just forgot that was a thing and that their relationship was important was kind of dumb to me. Now, they didn't need to go like full romance. This movie didn't have time for any romance like that. But even a friendship, they just needed to add some sort of conversation before she ended up sacrificing herself. And also, I think it would have made sense to show him being one of the people especially hurt, because of the character, she was the closest to Hawkeye, Captain America, and then the Hulk. So it would have made sense to show how it impacted him specifically, and also it would have been nice to have a one-on-one meaningful conversation between the two of them. Because again, even if you don't like what they did with their relationship, the fact of the matter is the directors and screenwriters put it into the movie series, and whether or not something is popular with an audience, if you put something into your story, you do have some sort of responsibility to go all the way through with it. Now, again, you could change how you intend it to end. Like if you set up a romance but realize it sucks, you can just have them decide to be friends or break up or something like that. But the point is forgetting that it ever happened is just not good writing. It's like you make a mistake in your story and you're like, wait, let me just retcon it out of existence. You don't do that. And my second issue with this story is that Captain America, in his first movie, his relationship with Bucky was really important, and it was a really tragic scene when Bucky died. And then in the second and third Captain America movies, the literal central conflict that surrounded everything was Captain America's friendship with Bucky and Captain America's loyalty to Bucky no matter the circumstances. So the fact that Captain America didn't have a conversation with Bucky, pretty much the second most important character in every single Captain America movie, was just dumb. Like, that just, again, with Hulk not talking to Natasha one-on-one, Bucky and Steve should have talked one-on-one because, again, they were really important to each other. Those are my biggest issues with the story. The Hulk and Natasha one's a bit more annoying because Steve could probably talk to Bucky later on and he was a bit more at peace, whereas then Natasha was tragic and then Hulk didn't really seem to care more than the average Avenger, but you know, whatever. And also the inclusion of Captain Marvel did feel a bit tacked on considering she didn't come in till the second half of a two-part movie. And if they ended up cutting her out, they could have switched the I like this one to it's this one's fault without adding any runtime. Then you could just have Nebula take them to the garden where her father Thanos is, because it makes sense she would know that. And then you can also have Scarlet Witch be the one to destroy the giant ship with all of Thanos' army, because she's really powerful and the movies haven't shown her full power, so you could just have her save herself when Thanos summons more power because she's overwhelming him, and then it'll give a chance to have Scarlet Witch be tough and show off how cool she is without taking away a scene with a woman, but it's a woman who's relevant to the movie, especially since Thanos was the one who killed Vision, so it makes sense she would have some cool moment. But despite my ranting, overall I did really like this movie and I thought it was well done, and it was a really impressive feat taking so many different movies and storylines and weaving them together in an epic climax and satisfying ending. Now, if you disagree with my solution or have any of your own ideas, I would love to hear them down below. But the main point of my video, aside from Endgame stuff but more about story writing, characters should only die if it's the most tragic and dramatic option. And if them living is more dramatic, you should spare them. Also, when you kill large groups of characters, some of the characters' deaths are bound to be overshadowed, so maybe you do have to kill a lot of characters at once, but take that into account, and if a character has more opportunity alive than dead, then you should definitely not kill them off in a way that they're gonna be overshadowed anyway. Overshadowed anyway. Also, number 3, your characters, especially your protagonist, needs to face repercussions for their actions. Unlike Star-Lord, who kind of was just gone until the solution was, everything was solved, so he never really had to deal with what he caused. Also, this is not me like ranting against Peter Quill, even though I'm saying he messed up. This is obviously someone who talking from a point where I like his character and I feel like he should have been explored more, because the type of guilt that mistake would cause would be really interesting. And obviously all the Avengers dealt with guilt, but since it was specifically his fault, I feel like that should have been delved into more, because of the heroes in that movie, he was literally the only one who messed up that much. But anyway, I hope you liked this video, and I would love to hear what you have to say down below. And I was thinking of either making this part of an analyzing fiction series or a rewriting fiction series, depending on what seems to be better. If you guys have any opinions, if you prefer analyzing fiction or rewriting fiction, please tell me them down below. For now, I'd probably just stick this into weird writing tips, but yeah. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I know this was kind of long and a bit rambly, even though I have a script, I just suck at talking. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.